Live from the Business Radio X studio inside Renaissance Bank, the bank that specializes in understanding you. It's time for North Fulton Business Radio.
And hello again, everyone. Welcome to another edition of North Fulton Business Radio. It's our last of 2019. So if you're listening to this in 2020, Happy New Year. But we're winding up with a great guest, Steve Wigmore, with YourPatentExpertcom. But before we get to Steve, I just want to remind you that we are broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studio inside Renaissance Bank in beautiful Alpharetta. And folks, today you're connected more than ever, whether it's your friends, your family, or your life. Renaissance understands how you bank, offering you the mobile banking services that you need. And of course, sometimes you need real people with real answers, and that's why Renaissance has more than 190 convenient locations throughout the South ready to serve you. For more information, go to renaissancebank.com. Renaissance Bank, understanding you, member FDIC. Now we turn to Steve Wigmore. Steve is with YourPatentExpertcom. Steve, something tells me you're a patent expert. I'm just guessing.
I see you're intuitive, John.
Right.
Very intuitive.
Yeah, you see how smart I am,
Yes,
right?
yes.
That's why I'm asking the questions, not answering them, right? No, seriously, tell us about you and tell us about what you do.
Well, thank you again for being on the show. This is wonderful. It as we were mentioning earlier, it serves a main purpose of my website, which I believe the educated client is a better client. And my website, that's really its main objective when you go there, is to give you some very good foundations in patent law. I was just writing about this yesterday, that if you go on or you become a contestant or a guest on Shark Tank, more than likely, and as I guess you have a CFO abbreviation after your name, so you might be familiar with this. Usually you have a business plan, right?
Sure. Or you should have one.
I think probably you won't get on the show without a business plan.
Right.
So that's the analogy I came up with, is use my website, YourPatentExpertcom, as your business plan for patent protection.
Cool. And let me just jump off for a second. So this is a lesson to a lot of professional services providers out there that think, oh, I don't want to share anything because I want to charge for it, right? Or or people won't call me. The truth of the matter is the exact opposite, right? People call you because you're sharing information, great information that reveals you to be the expert that you are.
Correct. Actually, when I do screen new clients, I've boiled down at least, looking you and me, over 20 years of experience into about 6 pages. And so usually I'll say, please read this patent primer before we speak, because that way I don't have to answer the basic questions to you over a phone call. That
Sure.
You have that information there. And it's okay, even if you may have some more, and you may need a repeat if you read it and you didn't understand it, and that's okay, and that's understandable. But for me, I think that helps the potential client a lot, that you can be educated pretty quickly with a document, and then we can dive into some of the facts. And usually, I make sure, definitely, and this is the part where advantage you're dealing with a lawyer, I make sure that I'm not taking too much, because during that first call, I'm not your lawyer yet. So I make sure that you describe facts in a very high level fashion. And at the same time, the beauty about technology and what I do, usually with an invention, you are solving a problem. And so you can tell me about the problems you're solving without disclosing the invention to me.
Sure. Now, and I want to get into that, but first I want to get into the fun stuff. So you have a great story about how you got interested in science, technology, ultimately engineering, and ultimately patent law. You had a favorite cartoon when you were young. Tell us about it.
Johnny Quest. And probably to everyone who's born, let's just say 1980 and earlier may get this cartoon reference. Others may hear that and go, Johnny Quest. And I was speaking before, there was another Cartoon Network cartoon around the 2000 era was Johnny Test. So I'm not confusing these cartoons. There was a Johnny Quest.
Right.
And it was televised. I think the copyrights were probably around circa 1968 through 1972.
Yeah, unfortunately, I saw the originals. But anyway, we'll move past that quickly. So tell folks that don't know Johnny Quest, tell them about it and why that inspired you.
It did, and it was interesting. Growing up in a family, and my older brother would always tune it in, and so we would watch it together. And at that time, pre-internet, and only dealing with cable, no satellite,
right.
There were a lot of reruns, repeats of shows, and so we would always look for the episodes that we were interested in, or most interested in. But Johnny Quest was a young man of probably, I'd say he wasn't a teenager yet. I'd say probably he's about 12 to 14.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But his dad was a scientist.
Right.
And, Dr. Quest, and then his partner, who was, I think, his bodyguard, Race Bannon.
Right.
They would just go on these adventures because, Dr. Quest would travel around the world and solve problems with his technology. And so Johnny would always be exposed to new technologies. And of course, like the boy he was, he would test these devices without his father's permission.
Of course.
And end up getting in some trouble here and there. But it's just funny. I joke with a lot of my friends that I think I can remember more Johnny Quest episodes than what I learned in law school. But that's kind of scary.
Yeah, I love that. But that's cool that you had that inspiration, right? I mean, so you started out in engineering and then ended up in patent law. So how did that jump happen?
Well, I have two little stories to tell. That one to tell me I did do my undergraduate degree at the University of Maryland in mechanical engineering. And I have to say, as much as I was influenced by science and mathematics, it didn't come easy. I was always the little train who could. I would march and get through these labs, engineering lab. If anyone is listening has an undergraduate degree in engineering, your lab classes will kill you on time. I mean, each lab would usually take about 40 hours complete, and usually each semester, every week, we'd have a lab to complete. But anyway, so one of my labs was a robotics lab. And it was cool because as you get up in your senior career in college, you get to take more interesting classes. So this was a robotics class, not an introductory, or I should say, not a basic class. So I've already had a couple engineering classes or labs underneath this. Mm-hmm. So for our final for the robotics lab, we had to program the robot, and it was a pick and place robot. It was basically really an arm, and the professor wanted us to almost show that you could program the robot to move objects on a plate, but very similar to a chess game. So how a robot would actually pick up a pawn and move it across the table. Well, for our final, we were good to go, and each group basically would reset the machine and then load their software. So I loaded my software, and I had a team of other 5, potential engineers. We all certified my software looked like it was good. We were ready to go. It was going to program the robot to do what it needed to do. Basically, pick up an object and move it to the other side of the plate. That was the experiment or the lab that we had to complete and prove to the professor. So when my arm went to start, I had everything right from the beginning. It moved and positioned, and it caught and held on to it, closed with its pincers. It grasped onto the first pawn, but it began to shake violently, and it just shook, and we didn't understand what the problem was. It actually, when it grabbed it, it wasn't really elevating it. It was pushing down on the plate with such tremendous force. It actually snapped the pawn. And ends up, and so we just started laughing because we didn't understand what the issue was. Mm-hmm. When we went back to the programming, we had forgot to zero out the location of the robot. You're supposed to tell it where it's supposed to start from, and apparently our programming, we forgot to reset its location. So it really thought it was supposed to start below the plane of the plate. So it was pushing down to start where it thought it should be. Mm. And of course, it didn't work, and it broke the pawn. And we still passed the lab, but not with flying colors. So I knew at that point my lab experience was going to push me towards a career that was a little bit more friendly, just on the writing and reading side.
Well, and so you had plenty of that to do when you ended up working for the U.S. Patent Office, right?
That's correct.
Wow. That's pretty interesting experience. Definitely hands-on.
So actually, the end of my college career, one of my remaining classes, we developed a tester that would test the thin gold wear on, if you look at every connector here on this table, and when you plug it in, they use certain metals, and gold is one of them. It's not, you wish you could say it's 100% gold, because I'd start boiling connectors right now, but
sure.
It's a low percentage of gold, but increases its conductivity. But over a certain period of time, there is some mechanical wear on the connector. So that's what we developed a device that would test, how many times insertions and removals of a connector. And so it's a somewhat complicated machine, but you could do it. But our professor asked, can you get a patent on that? And I'm like, a patent? What's that? And I was fortunate enough that the University of Maryland was, at that point, pre-internet, was a repository for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. At that time, prior to the internet, every school, every undergraduate, or I should say state school in a particular state, would be a repository for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So you could search patents. And that's what I started doing. I started searching for my own invention to see if it was patentable. Mm-hmm. And that's how I stumbled into patent law.
Wow. So you went to work for the U.S. Patent Office.
That's correct.
So tell us about that experience. That must have been interesting to see all these applications coming across the transom, as it were.
Yeah, it was very interesting. A great what's good about my experience at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is that, believe it or not, and that's the amazing thing I find about my experience there, that the process hasn't changed in now 30 years. The way they examine patent applications. So I was a junior patent examiner and would receive your patent application. And basically that's what is one of the key steps to reviewing patent applications, is you actually conduct patent searches for the invention. And then basically after you look at your results, you give an analysis, and usually what we say is a rejection. The patent office will always issue, in its first communication with you, they're going to reject it for some reason. A lot of my peers at the patent office said, this is not the rejection office, it's supposed to be the patent office, but we usually reject every first application as it comes in. But yeah, one of the experiences I had, now I knew I liked the patent office. But if I could paint a picture, if you can think of, I used to be an X-Files fan too. You see where I gravitate all my shows towards science. But one of the X-Files, one of the ending episodes of the show, and I think it's actually in the Raiders of the Lost Ark too, when they put the Ark of the Covenant in this big warehouse, and it just goes on and on. You would see football fields of just rows and rows and rows of cargo, and at the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, in the patent office, you have this incredibly long. Each floor had very, very long hallways, and they're usually white walls and white doors, and you couldn't see the end of the hallway. They would all be closed. All the doors would be closed because every examiner that was hired would just be behind their doors.
Right.
I'm a little bit more of a social creature, so I knew when I stepped out my office and I didn't see anybody that I might want to go into a more friendlier work environment, or environment I could socialize a little bit better. So that was one of the things I saw at the patent office that made me think, I might want to still use this experience, but I want to find an office that's a little bit more social than the patent office.
Right. I'm curious, you mentioned that every application gets rejected out of hand. Yeah. Why is that? For the first time around. First time the application comes in, every application gets rejected. Why?
They're shifting the burden on the applicant to prove that their invention is patentable. So, and usually as I was an examiner, I'm fresh out of engineering school in undergrad. I haven't had a day in my life of real world engineering experience. As I just told you, I'm not a robotics expert.
Sure.
Never will hold myself out to be one. But so that is who is reviewing your case. And so, and that is the ability with patent law, that it blends science and law. And so that's the legal side of it, that they're going to try to push the burden back on you. They're going to find the closest patents that they think, and at the end of every patent is that those are the legal definitions of the invention. And so it is somewhat of a legal review that's going on. And so they're going to find the two closest and usually three closest patents, and then they're going to push it back on you and go, look, we think these are closest to your claim. Tell us why they are not. And so that's why pretty much I would say over 20 years, I'd say the percentage is, I'd say 95% of my cases will always get a rejection as the first communication from the patent office.
So you need to know that going in.
Yeah.
And what else did you learn from your time at the patent office that helps you work with clients today in terms of successfully arguing their case?
It's very interesting that if you've ever engaged a patent lawyer, and you'll know, and they'll say, you should conduct a telephonic interview with the examiner. And that is the first thing out of my mouth when I speak to, I'd say a fellow examiner. I still feel like I'm an examiner. I was there for 3 years, but that I tell them, I go, how's it going? I used to be an examiner. I totally understand what you need to get done. What can we do? What can I do to help you move this case off your desk? And it's amazing how that lowers the shields, because a lot of, and I put that on my website, that, there are people out there, they're patent agents that do not have a law degree that can practice patent law. And ultimately that's really what an examiner is. An examiner really has the qualifications of a patent agent should they practice outside the patent office. Usually a lot of examiners don't have a law degree. A lot of lawyers that practice patent law are patent lawyers. And so usually the examiner will know this, and they know that. So basically I have a Juris Doctor degree. They do not. And a lot of lawyers like to preach to the world that they do, and they will try to intimidate examiners if they've never worked with examiners before. And examiners do not, and I was an examiner, don't like it when you try to intimidate me.
Of course not.
It's not a fun experience.
Right.
So I try to use that somewhat of that psychology, that approach to the examiner, that, hey, let's work together. I used to be in your shoes. What can I do to help you?
Folks, call Steve Wigmore if you need a patent, because he will not offend the folks at the patent office, right? So that's right.
My old friends. I have a few friends that still work there.
There you go. Okay, awesome. So tell us a little bit about some of the famous cases you've worked on, because you've had some interesting cases over time.
So the most publicized case probably is LendingTree's first two patents. So a plugin for LendingTree where banks compete, you win. They developed basically it's software and quasi what we say business method type patents, because it ends up the software is helping people manage money or make decisions about money. And so that's I want to say the business method side of it. But what's interesting about business method patents, and it was an issue that came up when I actually worked on this case in circa 2000, and it's still an issue today. The Patent Office is geared to review and examine technologies, electronics, devices, chemistries, methods of manufacturing. To say that a method, and there's a recent Supreme Court decision that if there's anyone in the patent bar like myself listening to this now will understand this Alice Supreme Court decision was just detrimental to business method patents because they basically rejected a case that was software for doing business over the internet. And they just basically said, well, if it's just a business method, we're just rejecting it. It was pretty much what it boils down to. And so it was an issue that was still there and still is today, that you have to try to make sure your cases are more, that there's some element of technology, and that's the secret of success of getting software patents through the Patent Office at the moment. And now the Patent Office has finally came out with some better guidelines about the Supreme Court Alice decision, is to look for what is the technical problem you're solving. They still don't want to see just the business method side of things.
And help me understand business method versus software. How does that division break down in terms of the way the office looks at it? I mean, because which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Correct. It's somewhat nebulous when we say business method, and to my point before, and especially for our audience who has not seen a patent claim. So basically, everything in a patent, an issued patent, is ultimately what your patent application looks like, and every patent application tells a story. And that's actually, it goes to I like preaching about the founders, and that's what the patent system was set up for. You're going to be granted a patent. It's a quid pro quo in exchange for telling the world exactly how to make and use your invention. If the claims you present show how different you are and how patentable you are, we will grant you a monopoly on those claims, which will be very smaller elements of your total invention. But that's what your patent will be on, the legal definitions, the smaller elements of invention. But in order for you to get a patent on the smaller elements, you need to tell us how it fits into the big picture. So that's what your patent case is driven towards. So a lot of patent cases, when they're dealing with software and dealing with basically money issues on the internet, whether you're managing money, your CFO background, some sort of accounting that's going on.
Right.
When you start to claim that at the end, the legal definitions, how you're claiming it, if you start presenting information and presenting claim elements that are directed more towards the business side of things, that's how they're going to review the case as something a little bit more nebulous about business. What they feel more comfortable with is you can talk about the discrete steps the software may be doing, what's different, what's the technology that's helping you manage money, but don't focus too much on the result of the money being handled.
Right.
And so that's how we got the Lending Tree patent through, is that we are trying not to focus so much on the business side of it, but what was unique about the process and the technology side.
We're speaking with Steve Wigmore, and Steve is an intellectual property lawyer with YourPatentExpertcom. Steve, talk about the advice you give, and you give a lot of information on your website again. So thank you and congratulations on that. But walk us through how you counsel a client when it comes to getting a patent versus not getting one, because it's very expensive to go through the process. It's time consuming, and it may not come out in your favor, right? It's an uncertain process from the beginning.
Correct.
And it could be that you just need to get into business and go.
True.
Talk about how you walk a client through yes or no on getting a patent.
Very, very good question. Like we were discussing before, as I want the website to be an educational site. And yes, it is a free plug-in for me. I'd love to be your patent lawyer. Should the facts and arrive that we would be a good fit, me and my law firm would be a good fit. But more so to educate you on the process. So whenever I'm engaging a new client, I want you to understand what you're getting into and what the patent process is all about. And so that's what I set up the website to do, to give you all that front-end information in really a cohesive manner. That it's simple but cohesive. Because I've been stepping in the shoes and just trying to look at other websites, and I've gone to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website, and I have to say I'm overwhelmed when I'm trying to step in the shoes of an entrepreneur and what's my next step or my first step.
Right.
And so that's why I bring up the website. So to counsel a new client, that's one of my main objectives, and I actually put that on my website, that I want you to make money, because aren't we doing this for that reason, right?
Right.
Isn't that CFO side of you coming out? Like, why would you pay a lawyer to do something? Because ultimately, you just don't want to pay the lawyer, right? You want to get some sort of protection for your innovation, and you can make your protection more valuable. And that's one of the things I talk about during that first interview. After, and like I said, I usually want a potential client to read my website. There's what I call a patent primer that gives you the basics on patent law. I want you to have that foundation so we can have a richer conversation and get away from all the, I want to say, the details that you can actually read on your own, that we can get into, what's driving you to do this. And that's one of the fundamentals that comes out of many of my conversations with entrepreneurs and startups, is like, you do need to create a business around the innovation. And yes, the patent is an asset that you can invest in, but it's not going to be a revenue generator up front. And you need to create a business that generates the revenue. And that's what I say, when you're creating the business, then now you can set aside a budget for the patent protection of the asset.
Gotcha. Now, you have had a big win lately.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate it. Tell everybody about it.
Well, in the scheme of things, for this particular client, it wasn't their most important invention, but they became a little frustrated with the process. Let me see if I can refresh my memory on the title was Blast Activated Quick Disconnect Apparatus.
Yeah, I was going to let you come out with that, but I figured you could do that justice better than I could.
So what was interesting about this case is they were having a really tough time with the patent examiner. And so I actually inherited this case. I didn't draft the case. I inherited the case from another law firm. Mm-hmm. And my client came to me because, and that's, I want to say, an easy plug for me. I love to service entrepreneurs and startups, but I also like to work with you along the way to help you grow. So maybe beyond startup, you become a pretty a good company, a lot of revenue generation.
Sure.
So I do work with big companies too.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of my bigger companies that actually has more than one patent lawyer, and I think that's always a good thing, or I should say more than one law firm servicing their portfolio. So I got this inherited from another law firm that was just throwing up their hands going, what do we do with this case? And this examiner is being irate, not very reasonable, and argumentative on the phone.
Wow.
And the thing is, as we all get more senior, everyone has a different personality. And sometimes it depends on your approach, and how patient you can be. Because I have to say, you can find out the name of the examiner on this patent based on that title. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but when I called up that examiner, he wasn't very positive to me in that first call. He still remembered the prior lawyer, and I tried to explain, I'm not the same lawyer. I'm a different lawyer. They decided to go with a different firm. But ultimately, again, he became a little more friendly. It did take some time once I told him I used to be an examiner. And so that was the success that makes me a little bit different compared to others, that once I can have a more genuine conversation with an examiner, and the examiner is basically the judge on your case. He can behave like a judge, and if they're a primary examiner means that they've been reviewing patents for at least 6 years, and they have full signatory authority, meaning that they can sign off on the patent by themselves. They can basically grant patents by themselves. They are the judge.
Wow.
If you can have a genuine conversation with them and then cut through a little bit of, I think as I alluded before, if you're a lawyer trying to intimidate a patent examiner, it may not always be your best strategy to get a patent.
A real lesson in the use of empathy, right?
Correct.
I mean, because that's what you're doing.
Especially with workflow. And that was one of the points that I brought up when I was thinking about my career, that for over 30 years, the patent office has, and this is the part where actually I was telling a potential client this yesterday, that they actually have a mathematical equation that they're supposed to, when we always laugh about, when police officers issue tickets and that they have a quota. Well, believe it or not, the patent office does have a quota. It's called production. And they have a production equation that the examiner is supposed to meet every 2 weeks. And it's a multivariable calculus problem. And this is the part where it's kind of scary. We have engineers and lawyers kind of, blending the law here, blending the workspace.
Oh my.
So what I find fascinating about the production equation, which is really, the patent office, they listen to this, they're not going to be happy about it, but they haven't changed the production equations in 30 years. And guess what? What's changed in 30 years? And here I am holding a BlackBerry.
Yes.
Technology's evolved, is changed. And so they need to tweak their production equations a little bit, because certain technology areas have become more robust and sophisticated. And so to that point, a lot of examiners will have very complicated subject matter, but their production equation is based on technology in the 70s where it was less sophisticated, but they still have that same amount of time that they had in the 70s to examine that case that they have now in circa 2020.
That's really fascinating information. Not surprising, given the way sometimes the federal government can work, but it's fascinating. And it's important to know because
it's a strategy.
Yeah, because it's a strategy, and you have to have a patent attorney that understands that process and understands how that works and can work through that.
Yeah, it helps grease the sleds on a lot of my cases, and it has some very productive telephonic interviews with the examiners. And I have to say, you can still do it in person.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that's what we did with Lending Tree's case, and it still hasn't changed today. So if the client can't afford to pay for the lawyer's flight expense
mm-hmm.
and have them interview in person with the examiner, that's always the best result. You always make a lot more, even, compared to a telephonic or a phone call.
Sure.
To meet in person has such an influence on the case.
Sure. Steve, talk about the folks that are a good fit for you.
Sure.
What kind of products or different patents that folks are looking for? What are the best fits for you?
So, and I like to educate the public. I feel actually an ethical obligation. I like that part. I think as you're reflecting on your career, how can I better serve others? So in a sense, if I get a better educated client that could actually better serve me, is that you definitely want a patent lawyer in your technical discipline. So the prime example here is I actually have a client that has a PhD in biochemistry. I actually don't do biochemistry, and I don't have a PhD in biochemistry, and I'm not qualified to review and examine patents in biochemistry, but he is. He actually is a patent agent for a company. But the reason why he comes to me is for all those disciplines outside of his expertise, which is my expertise, which would be mechanical, electrical, software, electronics, and business method type patents. But I do have an area which I'm happy to tell any potential client, I can't do chemistry. I can't write a patent case on chemistry. You're going to have to find someone who's got a chemical engineering background or a pure chemistry, a BS in chemistry, and who's a patent lawyer that can handle your chemistry cases. And the same thing for biotech, anything dealing. And usually what's interesting about, I've rubbed elbows with other biotech lawyers. A lot of so I have a good colleague of mine, at, I want to say Knowles Intellectual Property Strategies. He'll like that plug in.
No.
That they do, biochemistry and pharmaceutical cases.
Mm-hmm.
My firm does not. We do not have the people in that discipline. And so a lot of times we'll refer cases to their firm. So it's important as an educated consumer, an educated potential client, that depending on what your technology space is, the background of your patent lawyer should hopefully line up, and you should ask them that question. Do you have the technical background that you could help me draft and write and prosecute my patent application?
That's great advice from Steve Wigmore, and Steve is with YourPatentExpertcom. Steve, this has been great. Lots of great information. Obviously, you've got a website out there with even more information.
Sure.
So for those that would like to be in touch either with you personally or get to your website, remind them how to do that.
YourPatentExpertcom. And
there you
go. It has my direct line. I actually don't have support staff. It rings me directly.
That's pretty cool. So you go right to the website. You can find your phone number and what have you. Start
a conversation.
Sounds great. Steve Wigmore with YourPatentExpertcom. Thanks for being with us.
John, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Folks, just a reminder that you can find this show on virtually any podcast app you want to go to. Search for NorthFultonBusinessRadio.com or just North Fulton Business Radio, actually. And you can get to us through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio. I have yet to have anyone stump me on a podcast app they can't find us on. So we're out there. We're also on YouTube, so you can search and find us there. You can go my website too. Oh, there you go. You can go to NorthFultonBusinessRadio.com and search our archive. So we've done I think this is show number 186 or something like that. So we've done a lot of shows, over 430 guests over 4 years. So a lot of great business leaders like Steve, who we've had on the show over that time. So check us out there. And then finally, connect with us on social media, North Fulton BRX, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on Twitter. You can find us there. So for my guest, Steve Wigmore, with YourPatentExpert.com. I'm John Ray. Join us next time here on North Fulton Business Radio.
Renaissance Rewards Extra is the checking account that checks all the boxes. Roadside assistance? Check. Cell phone insurance? Check. More than 400,000 local shopping discounts? Check. Up to $25 per month in ATM refunds and a great rate? Check. All in an easy-to-use mobile app. To open an account or find out more about Renaissance Rewards Extra Checking, go to renaissancebank.com or visit us at any of our more than 190 locations throughout the South. Renaissance Bank. Understanding you. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender.